Hello, welcome to No Veto Video. I'm Katherine.
And I'm Carson. And this week we're going to tell you all about Let Me In from 2010. Directed by Matt Reeves and starring Cody Smitt-McPhee, Chloe Grace Moretz, Richard Jenkins, Elias Koteas, and Dylan Minnette.
So Let Me In is a remake of sorts of the Swedish film Let the Right One In. Tells the story of a boy, a bullied young man who meets something otherworldly, and hijinks ensue from there. Guess it's very obvious from the beginning. This is a vampire film, so he meets a vampire and hijinks ensue from there.
Even the plot description, everywhere it's listed, says vampire.
I was
so
being
I think
super vague for the purposes of not spoiling anything.
Yeah. So I chose this movie because, one, I'd seen it, and while it was pretty formulaic, I think we can probably both agree, it did touch on some interesting topics, but also I want to eventually do a compare-contrast with Let the Right One In. Both of them claim to be based on the book, but this one really feels, from what I understand, based on the other movie, which was based on the book. So this seems 2 steps removed. So what did you think of the movie overall?
I liked it. I mean, I think it's a fairly successful film. This isn't a scary movie at all. I mean, even the most, and the right at the very end of the film climax is sort of the most graphically violent part of it. Even it's not terribly scary. In fact, there's a sort of removal from violence in this movie. And all the different ways of it. I think it has these elements of conversations or broader philosophical ideas that it wants to explore. And I'm not 100% sure that it sticks all the landings that it's aiming for. In fact, I think it's most interested in a conversation about good and evil. Mm-hmm. We can probably talk a little more about that. But that ultimately I don't think it knows what to do with it. It ends up as sort of, the film is as ambiguous about the subjects of good and evil as the characters end up being. And so it just kind of peters out. Mm-hmm. And for me, I think a wider, sort of more complex idea of good and evil is sort of a discussion in this film about power and whatever. But I think ultimately for me what was the more interesting idea that this film didn't seem to be particularly interested in at all was sort of gender dynamics and masculinity and femininity and the ways in which sort of a femininity in a boy sort of opens him up to this kind of bullying and that experience. But the film doesn't seem like, anytime I was like, ooh, are we going to explore that now? And then it would throw me a bone and then move on. Yeah. Which is fine. Just fine.
To touch back on your mentioning their discussion of good and evil, I agree. It really felt like they would bring it up and then just drop it. And then they'd bring it up again and just drop it. And they never really
heavy-handed. Everywhere they brought it up, it was heavy-handed.
But they never actually had a discussion on it at all. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that got taken away on the cutting room floor or...
It's a wondering I have, yeah.
It's also possible that they kept bringing it up, but maybe they actually never meant to say something about it, and it was just accidental, but that doesn't feel...
But there are no accidents in film. I mean, you don't keep cutting back to Ronald Reagan's sort of discussion about America overcoming the evils of its past, and that America is good, and you don't cut to that twice. Yeah. If you don't.
Well, and you don't
have a Colgate commercial instead.
And you don't have the cop asking, so this movie is set in the 1980s. You don't have the cop asking, satanic panic questions as well.
That
and
actually
then
felt
you
more like a red herring. Like that felt like part of the distraction. Like that's not actually asking about
maybe
good and evil at its core. I don't think.
I think it was. I think there are a lot of more subtle things that are all lumped together in this discussion, and they keep touching on it throughout the entire movie. Just never.
You say subtle, I say clumsy.
Well, okay, that one was more subtle because you don't think that was part of the discussion. That's
No,
why
I think it's a clumsy reference. I think it's.
Okay.
I think the filmmakers probably intended it, but by having all of these different elements mushed together in this film and then not really doing anything with it, it feels to me like somebody who's very novice in this, like wants to say something, but doesn't have the building blocks, the essential building blocks to go forward with it. I mean, I think if this is your point and this is what you want to do and you want to make this a story about, you know, the wrestling of like how to be good, or the temptation or the draw towards evil, and how do I know what evil looks like? Tell that story. You've got all of the tools that you need for that in this story. You can certainly explore the different characters in different ways, but ultimately it feels kind of shoehorned in. Because it doesn't end up being this sort of coherent through line. And it's not even like, I'm not asking for him to solve the problem of good and evil. Like, obviously that's the thing that we're all as a society, as a culture, as a species, going to continue to wrestle with over time. I'm not asking for, you know, Hammer film to nail that one. Pardon the pun. But yeah, just sort of to have a more clear idea of what the filmmaker's idea about this is. And I think at the end of the day, you don't get that because there's so many other kind of elements into it.
I can see that. Going back also to touch on what you were discussing about gender dynamic, I didn't view it that way. I thought it was just pointing out the misogyny in our society.
Well, that's a gender dynamic.
Well, that's true, but for instance, Owen's bully calls him a girl multiple times. Owen's bully's brother calls him a girl. Then when Abby offers to help Owen with the bully situation, he says, "What can you do? You're just a girl."
Right. I mean, so this idea of that the feminine is an undesirable, like like if I really want to hurt you, I'll call you a girl, and a little girl at that. It's like, you know, it's sort of like saying that somebody has small genitalia, you know, for a man, like that somehow that diminishes their, you know, power in the world. It's like that's not a thing. Like that's not how we actually measure power in the world. And so, you know, the absence of male genitalia at all, thereby rendering somebody super like ineffectual. Of course, you know, with the girl being the, you know, very strong, you know, physically strong vampire, but also sort of with a clarity of purpose. I mean, sometimes a kind of scary clarity of purpose. Like, she really just wants to survive. In this film, like Abby kind of, like, clearly, but she's also, you know, she does sort of engage in the feminine, you know, and that sort of, so when she says, "I'm not a girl," in this film, one wonders what is it that she's trying to communicate to Owen, and does Owen have any capacity to understand what she's attempting to communicate back again? And then again, this is a question for me because in some ways I don't know that the filmmakers had a clear idea of what we are talking about when we, I mean, clearly they wanted to engage in this question a little bit, not just based on their casting. Cody Smitt-McPhee, in this stage of his life, I mean, he's since grown and put on some bulk, but he has a very slight frame. His face is kind of giving you like Hilary Swank and Boys Don't Cry kind of androgyny, and he's unsettled with his own lack of power. I mean, obviously, because he goes to the like Soviet coach to try and get bulked up, but at the same time, you know, he's going to use the same thing that's wounded him to wound something else, anyone else. I mean, at the
tree.
A tree. But you know, when he first opened up, he's in a monster mask.
Mm-hmm.
He's got a kitchen knife. He's making threatening gestures. You know. He's sort of taking on this sort of monstrous, toxic masculinity. And then he goes right away to the window and starts to, like, voyeuristically peer, not just at the woman, you know, across the way, who, you know, kind of doesn't passively receive that gaze, but he also voyeuristically watches the weightlifting high school student, you know, the young adult, the sort of more manly man. So and the light coming through the window or through the telescope, you know, sort of changes the color of his eyes to this sort of eerie, like that. This behavior, this taking on of this toxic masculine identity, makes you monstrous. Is certainly so. I was like, ooh, that's exciting. Let's explore that. But again, it kind of you know, peters out, and then it turns into, I don't know, a rom-com, like a little bit. I mean,
subtle.
Not so much, but
subtle, dark comedy, maybe.
I don't know. Yeah.
You mentioned parts of the movie were heavy-handed. Another part that I thought was heavy-handed was what they chose to shoot at any given time. For instance, they kept showing Abby's feet. We get it. She's walking around in the snow with no shoes on. They showed her feet like 6 or 7 times in different shots, and they just focused on them for a long time in each of those shots.
Like, do you get it? That's weird. That's weird, right?
And just in case we missed it, at one point, Owen looks at her feet, and at another point, Owen says, "Aren't you cold?" Yeah, we got it, filmmakers. We understand that she is...
And yet at one point she starts to wear shoes for no particular reason, as far as I could discern, and no comment was made on it. Like, so what are we supposed to make of that?
I thought she just got tired of people asking, "Aren't you cold?" Although she stopped wearing them again, I think, later.
Right.
So
yeah.
I have no idea. Were there any other scenes or any other things that they were focusing the camera on that you thought might have been heavy-handed?
I mean, there were some, I don't want to say heavy-handed, but there were some lovely moments. I think that, you know, early shot of Owen, you know, with the sort of eerie light on his face.
Yeah.
And, let's see. I think his room was just a really interesting, it was, on the one hand, it was sort of a nice, like, time capsule into that 80s, but, you know, a huge wall mural in his bedroom of Earthrise, which again has that sort of sense of otherness, right? You're standing on the moon looking out at the Earth, so you're not there. You know, you're from somewhere else. Just, yeah. And the way that the neighbor lady returns Owen's gaze was so direct, and in some ways so counter to our cultural, like, practice, that I was like, well, she's gonna turn out to be something. Like, she's gonna turn out to be like a werewolf or something. Like,
well, and later she had a look on her face, and you thought the same thing.
Because she seemed to know she was being watched.
Yeah.
And, like, was almost challenging or confronting her voyeur, you know, and yeah, so I was wrong. Spoiler.
I found it interesting, though, to compare Owen, who's bullied in, you know, smallish town 1980s, with some of the other movies and television shows we've seen set in that same time period, either made in that time period or made more recently and just set back then, and how he responds to bullying a lot different than, for instance, Stand By Me. They respond a lot differently, although they had friends.
And they had a community.
Or Stranger Things.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think community is at the heart of it. That for whatever reason, Owen doesn't even participate in PE. Like, Owen is kept otherized.
Yeah.
Throughout his, like, experience, or at least that's what we've seen of him. And I mean, clearly, divorce wasn't unknown in the early 80s, but it certainly wasn't common. It was sort of more of a traumatic experience that kids would go through. But I think also, you know, that having his mother be the way she was, that there were all of these things that kind of worked together to keep Owen isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And that, just from a sociological standpoint, really sets up a different way of responding to being bullied. If you don't have anybody to challenge what a bully says to you, then, you know, you're much more likely to buy it. What's terrifying in Owen's case is that not only does he accept that what the bully says about him is true, but to some greater or lesser extent, but that he also, like, his idea of overcoming being bullied is to become a bully himself. Like, to take on, to pick up the violence of the bully and to make it his own. And that's terrifying.
Which is an interesting parallel to his bully versus his bully's brother.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, this is another one of those heavy-handed.
Yeah.
Like, it is very clear that this film wants to, you know, like, convince you of the cycle of violence, which, you know, perfectly legit.
Yeah.
But yeah, like, the true psycho, like, the psychoest of psychos is the bully's older brother.
Maybe. We don't see him for very long.
Well, then it'll turn out to be, like, the father, and then you know, like...
I'm still going with the bully for 2 scenes as being the most psycho.
Oh. But, like, why does he feel like he needs to pick on Owen? He needs to pick on Owen because he's picked on himself. Why does the older brother pick on the younger brother? Well, perhaps, you know...
Yeah.
I think it's one of these, like, chains of causality kind of things.
Yeah. I can see that. So, you mentioned the mother. What did you think of her character?
I wasn't sure exactly what the filmmakers were trying to say about her. I wasn't sure. But I think there was something very pathetic about her. I mean, if I had to guess why Owen wasn't participating in sports, it would be because the mother was like, no, my darling child is not, you know... This kid is... How old do you think Owen is?
10?
You think he's in 5th grade? I thought he was a little older. I thought he was closer to Abby's age, or maybe even a little older than that. But...
Oh. I know how old he is. He says 12.
Okay, so he's 12. So, you know, but he's being kept in this playground, you know, and yet... in the midst of this, that she's not attentive enough to him because she's going through her own stuff, and there's
Yeah.
You know, clearly, like, she's always being shown drinking out of the carafes of Boone's farm. Like, every scene,
Yeah.
she's drinking wine, like, and fighting, or fighting with Owen's dad over the phone, and or praying, you know, and so there's this, like, confluence of, like,
Mm-hmm.
you know, you're somebody who's overtly religious, and yet you live this, you know, what surely many people would say is a sinful lifestyle of, you know, alcoholism and being passed out and not attending to your children who were making best friends with vampires. And,
Yeah.
you know, the way that that things go for people. But then at the same time, there's this judgment about her, and I think there's not even enough of her character present
Mm-hmm.
to, like, the judginess of the film. I get, but it feels adolescent to me.
Yeah.
Like, maybe that's the point. Maybe it's from Owen's perspective. The only visions of her we get are from his perspective. But I mean, obviously, there's more to the story than that. And she may be practicing her religion overtly as sort of a last-ditch effort to kind of keep herself from sliding all the way off the cliff.
Mm-hmm.
But we don't know that. I mean, we're not given any time with her. She's not, you know, none of the adults really are given names.
I think the police officer had a name, didn't he? No? Okay.
The neighbor people had names, but that's only because
right.
they were fighting amongst themselves.
That's right. And the PE teacher had a name.
Right.
I found the mother an interesting contrast to the character known as Father in the credits, Abby's handler, for lack of a better word, the person that went out and did work for Abby.
Mm-hmm.
So the mother was physically there a lot of the time, but not really there in any appreciable sense emotionally for Owen, it seemed. Whereas the man who was living with Abby was like going out of his way to do things for Abby.
Yeah, but I never got this, like he was identified as a paternal figure.
No,
But for me, he never felt like a paternal figure.
No, I get that. What I'm saying is the contrast of
I know,
their
I know.
interactions with the children they lived with.
Yeah. I'm trying to figure out how to say what I want to say without being too spoilery.
Spoilery.
Excepting to say that for me, it was perfectly obvious, like, the moment we saw him.
Oh, yeah.
Like, what the story was.
Yeah.
And just what a pathetic character. Like, in that he engenders feelings of sympathy. Like,
Yeah.
It was really, of all of the performances, and you don't spend much time with him, but, so Richard Jenkins is the actor. It's such a nuanced performance,
Mm-hmm.
and it's nuanced and very specific, like, it's very, very specific, but it's so beautifully portrayed. It's so obvious, like, instantly how he's feeling,
Yeah.
what's going on, because it's all right there on his face, it's in his eyes, and you just feel it. You know, some of the other characters in the film you kind of have to intellectually, like, go with, but his performance is just, like, maybe it's because of this, like, satanic panic nonsense or whatever, but, like, whatever was going on for the police officer, it didn't, like, land for me on an emotional level, but Richard Jenkins' performance really landed for me on an emotional level, so.
Okay.
To this part of the film, but I think it's because it has specificity and sort of emotional connection, and I think he had a full understanding of what this guy's life was like, and, like, he wasn't trying to tell a bigger story. You know?
Yeah.
He was trying to tell this very specific story, and that realness really kind of landed for me. Did you have a stand-up performance?
I mean, he really did capture it. I don't really think most of the other characters lived up to his performance, either through just they weren't given enough screen time, or they weren't given enough dialogue when they were on screen, or whatever. Or it could just be they're just not up to the caliber of acting as he is. But I think it's unfair to try comparing a lot of the characters who didn't necessarily even get screen time to say whether or not the actor pulled it off.
Okay. All right. Well, any last thoughts for you?
Just, and we've already mentioned this a little bit, what they chose to focus the camera on for a lot of the time, just a little confusing. Like, they could have either cut some scenes out, or I think a better use of it would be to keep the scenes and focus the camera on something important that was going on.
Yeah, I think what you're... Let me see if I can... If the filmmakers had trusted us a bit more, then they would have had more time to explore some of the more interesting ideas of the film. Yeah, I think I can go with you on that. It's not a... We're not making a cinematography...
No.
Or an editing... Well, I guess we're making a little
editing a little.
But it's not a cinematography thing. It's not like how did they choose to frame the...
No, I think they did really well overall with that.
Our complaint is about, trusting us to get it the first time you do something.
Yeah.
All right. So that is our response, our review of Let Me In. Tell us what you think. Agree, disagree. You can put some comments down below in the comment section here on YouTube. You can find us, if you're watching us from the website, at novitovideo.com. There's a comment section there as well. The boards are on fire. No, they're not on fire. Anyway, so yeah, come find us. Let us know what you think. We are interested in continuing the conversation with you.
And that brings us to the point in the show where we give you our override recommendations. If you haven't watched us before, this is the part where...
Welcome.
Yes, welcome. You're here. This is the part where, keeping with the theme of vetoing, we have an override pick where if you didn't like this movie, maybe you would like this other movie, or if you enjoyed it, this other movie would kind of go along with the same theme. What's your override for this week?
So my override pick for this week is the Iranian film Girl Walks Home Alone at Night. It's another teenage girl vampire movie. Buckle in. It's a very dialogue light, pretty slow moving, like luxuriantly paced film. So, but yeah, check that out.
I'm going to kind of cheat and instead of a movie, pick a TV series, which is what you normally do.
Which is what I normally do.
Stranger Things.
Okay.
It's set in a town of, seems to be about the same size-ish. The culture's kind of similar. It's also set in the 80s. A small group of kids with some supernatural things going on in their town.
Season 3 will be out this fall.
Yes.
It's a Netflix original, so check it out on Netflix. And, this little known, hardly ever talked about the series Stranger Things. Alright. Next time on No Veto Video, we will be checking out the... I'm on an Iranian cinema kick right now. Not really. But we'll be checking out the Iranian horror movie Under the Shadow, which is currently available on Netflix.
One of the rare times you've picked a horror movie.
It is. It is. So we will see if that was a terrible mistake.
So again, thank you for watching, and click the subscribe button down in the corner, and we'll see you next time.
Bye.